Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're not just going to look at history, we're going to listen to it. We're tuning into the actual poems, proverbs, and prayers of early America to hear the voices that built a nation. Ready? Let's dive in.
So let me ask you, if you could just drop in and listen to the past, what would colonial America actually sound like? Would it be the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, whispered prayers by a fireplace, or maybe some witty arguments happening out in the town square? It's a cool thing to think about, right? Well, today, we're going to find out.
Turns out, it might sound a lot like a secret poem, or a really clever proverb, maybe even a child's first prayer. We're about to listen in on 3 totally different voices from that time, and each one, well, it's like a secret window into what these people truly cared about, what kept them up at night, and how they made sense of their world. Okay, our first stop is inside the home, in the private world of a Puritan woman. Now, I know what you're thinking, Puritans, right? Kind of stern, kind of serious. But this is where it gets interesting. We're talking about Anne Bradstreet, and her story gives us this incredibly surprising peek into the colonial heart. Just listen to this. If ever two were one, then surely we. I mean, wow. This just shatters that old stereotype of Puritans being all cold and emotionless, doesn't it? This is a love poem she wrote to her husband, and it is just brimming with this deep, passionate, personal love. It's proof that behind that very public, very stern faith, there was this incredibly rich emotional world. But her writing wasn't just about love and family. She also wrote about something else, her struggle as a creator, as an artist. And you have to remember, for a woman in the 1600s, that was, well, it was practically unheard of. So she had this really complicated relationship with her own work, this mix of pride and, a real sense of insecurity.
And the way she wrote about this is just brilliant. She uses this cool literary trick called an extended metaphor. Basically, through this whole poem called The Author to Her Book, she compares her book to her child. But not just any child, a messy, clumsy, kind of poorly dressed kid. She literally calls it an ill-formed offspring. It's such a perfect way to show how she felt, this fierce, protective love for what she created, but at the same time, this deep embarrassment about its flaws.
So, how did these super private poems ever see the light of day? Well, the story is actually incredible. Check this out. She's writing these poems by candlelight, right? Then her brother-in-law, who clearly thinks she's a genius, secretly takes them all the way to London, and he gets them published, without her even knowing. Can you imagine? On one hand, she was horrified, but you have to think, deep down, she was also proud. And just like that, she became the first published woman poet in the New World. Just amazing. All right, so we're leaving the private world of the home and heading out into the bustling public square. And our second voice? Oh, it's a big one. It's maybe the most famous colonial of all, Benjamin Franklin. You know him, the absolute master of practical, witty, common-sense wisdom. I mean, who hasn't heard these? Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac was a bestseller, and it was packed with these little gems of advice. A penny saved is a penny earned. Well done is better than well said. Even the funny ones, like fish and visitors stink in 3 days. You've probably heard a bunch of these before. They're all about hard work, being smart with your money, and just plain old common sense. And back then, that kind of thinking wasn't just helpful, it was absolutely essential to survive and get ahead. But here's the thing, this famous wisdom didn't just come out of nowhere. He didn't just wake up one day with all the answers. Nope. It was learned the hard way, through experience, and yeah, through some pretty embarrassing mistakes. In fact, there's this one story from when he was a kid that basically shaped how he thought about money and value for his entire life. It's a great little story known as The Lesson of the Whistle. So picture this. Little 7-year-old Ben Franklin sees a toy whistle and has to have it. He spends all his money on it. Then he gets home all excited, and his family basically just laughs at him, telling him he paid 4 times what it was worth. He was so embarrassed, but that moment stuck with him. It became his lifelong rule. Whenever he was about to buy something or make a big decision, he'd stop and ask himself that one simple question. Am I giving too much for the whistle? Okay, for our last voice, we're shifting gears. This one doesn't belong to a single person. It's the collective voice of millions, of children. We're going to crack open the first school book for generations of colonists, the New England Primer, to see exactly what values they were teaching kids from day one. Just try to imagine learning your ABCs like this. Seriously, A is for, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. Whoa. And F, the idle fool is whipped at school. This wasn't just about reading, was it? No way. Every single letter, every lesson was a lesson in morality and religion. It tells you everything you need to know about what was most important to them. And get this, the influence of this one little book was just massive. We're talking 150 years. For a century and a half, this was the main textbook for American kids. So those lessons about faith, duty, obedience, they weren't just school lessons. They were shaping the entire worldview of millions of people.
This chart really drives the point home, doesn't it? Let's just compare. Colonial school, one room, all the kids of different ages thrown together. Supplies? Maybe a horn book if you were lucky. But look at the last row. That's the real kicker. The goal. Today, it's about career and college readiness. Back then, the entire point of learning to read was so you could read the Bible. That was it. That was the whole game.
Okay, so we've heard from the poet, Anne Bradstreet, the pragmatist, Ben Franklin, and the pupil, learning from the primer. They seem pretty different, right? So what happens when you put them all together? What kind of picture does that paint of the colonial mind?
This really sums it all up. You've got the poet, all about the home, the heart, love, and faith. Then the pragmatist, out in the world, focused on work, wit, and being thrifty. And finally, the pupil, learning about duty, God, and virtue for the next generation. Here's the most important thing to get. These weren't opposites. They weren't fighting each other. They were all different parts of the same whole, fitting together to create a complete person.
So when you listen closely to all these voices at once, you start to hear a really complex world. A world that absolutely valued deep, private feelings, but also demanded sharp, public common sense. All of it built on this rock-solid foundation of faith and duty.
And that brings us to a final question, one for you to think about. I mean, the American identity is still a mix of all these things, right? The hardworking pragmatist, the private romantic, the moral teacher, they're all still in there. So as you go about your week, just listen. Which of these colonial voices do you still hear today?